Welcome to a new video of Kotlin for Beginners playlist. Today we're going to learn how to take the user input and display it to the console. But first I want to have a little note about print and println. So far we have been using them interchangeably without knowing the difference between them. So let's have a quick example here to know the difference between them. So first I'm going to start with println. So first I'm going to print astros, and here I'm going to print coding. So from the program, we expect that each of the statements here going to print on a separate line, so asterisk coding. Now notice here we have an empty line after coding between the process finished and coding, and that's because the println, what it does is that it prints what's passed to the arguments, and after printing it prints an empty line. So here asterisk printed, then it leaves an empty line for coding, then coding is printed, and there's an empty line here. So what if we get rid of the ln here and try to run the program now? Now see, we don't have the empty line no more. And if we try it with the first statement, now both of the statements are printed in the single line. Now let's discuss the taking user input. So we have multiple functions to do that. First we're going to start with readLine. So this readLine returns a string. So first I'm going to just prompt the user to enter his username. So enter your username. I'm going to save the username into a variable. So val username is equal to readLine. And readLine just returns a string. Now let's print the username here. So username is username on the program. And now we have the username, so Astro for example, and username is Astro. Now let's discuss other ways to take the user input. So the other function which helps us to do that is called readln. So it's named pretty similar like println, but it doesn't print an extra line, it just reads the whole line. So just like readline here. So just let's try it, readln on the program, insert Astro again, and I'm going to have the same result. So both of them do the same thing, or did the same thing. So now what's the difference between readline and readln here? To learn that, I'm going to have an extra variable. So I'm going to just get rid of the println here. I'm going to name the variable with readln username1, the other one username2. Pretty creative, and I know. Now the return type of this function here is of type string, and it's stored within this variable here. And the return type of this readline here is of type string with a question mark, and also saved on this variable here. So question mark, this might be weird. So the question mark with the data type is just adding more ability for this data type, or adding more ability for this variable here, making it accept null values. So whenever you see a data type with a question mark, keep in mind that this variable or this function, if it was a function, accepts this data type with null values. So null values or nullability in Kotlin is just the absence of a value. So whenever a variable is assigned to null, it doesn't have a value. So say for example, I'm gonna make this variable here of type string. So I'm not gonna get user input. I'm just gonna have a simple variable of type string, which is nullable. Now I'm gonna assign it to null here, and the other one here I'm gonna give it type string, which is not nullable, and I'm gonna assign it to null. And see that the compiler will give us a compile time error saying that null cannot be a value of a non-null type string. So this string here is not accepting any null values. If you remember from the first video of this playlist, we have talked about how Kotlin is being a null safe language. So Kotlin just offers you something called null safety, which prevents you or makes you avoid accessing properties or members of some kind of variables that might be assigned to null value. Let's have an example to understand that. Before that, this string here is not nullable. It's not like this one here, so we cannot assign it to null. Let's give it a value. So I'm going to give it asterisk here and say that we wish to print the length of both of these variables here. So I'm going to print the length of the first one. So username1 dot length, and let's try to print the second one. And here we have an error, and here comes the null safety in Kotlin. So in other languages, you might not have an error, and if you run the program, you will have a common error, which is null pointer exception. So null pointer exception is just a fatal error that will terminate your program, and Kotlin helps you to avoid that. So we here trying to access the length of something that doesn't exist, so it doesn't have a value and it doesn't exist. But if you wish to access the length of this variable here, so say for example you're gonna assign it later or reassign it later, so if you wish to access the length of that, you have to add the save code operator here. So the save code operator will check first if this variable has been assigned to not null value, then it will print its length, and if it's not, it will just print null. So if we run the program now, we would have 5. So this is here we have 5 characters and null, because we don't have length for something that doesn't exist. What's really annoying with the save code operator, that for every transaction or for every call that you make on properties or members of this variable, you have to add it. So for example, say I want to get the first character of this variable here, so we're just going to get the first character of the string. See that the compiler forces us to add the save call operator again, as this value might be null. Now for this we have another operator which is called the not null assertion operator. So if you, for example, at first initialize your variable, so I'm going to make it var here, to null, and you're going to reassign it later to a not null value. For example, when you get some response from the internet, you're going to assign this variable to a not null value. And if you're very sure that this variable is not null anymore, you have to add, or you should use, or you could use the assertion or not null assertion operator, which resembled by double exclamation mark. And once you use it for the first time, you should not, or you can get rid of the save code operator. So now if you run the program, we would have the null pointer exception, as this variable is not reassigned. So say for example I want to print something when the application is done, so println done. I'm just going to comment this value here, and notice we have added the not null assertion, so we are telling the compiler that this variable is not null. Now run the program, and here we have our exception. So 5 is printed here. Now we try to access the property or member of null reference. We have an exception, not null pointer exception, and println or done here is not printed. So using the not null assertion operator is not very recommended. So make sure always to use the save call, as it will help you to avoid having these exceptions, as it just terminates your program. Kotlin is also smart enough to detect if the nullable variable have been reassigned to not null. So whenever you have reassigned your not nullable variable to not null value, you can get rid of the null safe or save call operator here. So say for example I have this variable which is nullable string, which is assigned to null, and whenever I have to call one of its members, I have to add the save call operator. But if we reassign this variable, so say for example we're going to reassign it to master2, now the compiler will give you a suggestion telling you that you can get rid of the save call operator. If you run, you would have 5 and 6 as a result of these two strings length. Now we know that the save call operator will help us to display null instead of terminating our program with null pointer exception. But displaying null to the user might be ambiguous. So say for example you want to have a custom message. So the way to check for nullability, instead of having the safe call operator here is with the if else block. So I'm going to have if name not equal to null, then I want to print this message here. And if it's null, then I'm just going to say println no name was provided. For the program, our custom message will be printed. Great. Also with the age, for example, so before checking for age that has a null reference, so age is an int and it's nullable. So if you try to access the age or try to do any operation on the age, so age is greater than equal to 18. Notes here that the compiler give you an error saying that age might be null, so we first have to check for its value. So if age not equal to null and age is greater than or equal to 18. So instead of having if else, there's also another way to check for nullability. So we could use the Elvis or so-called Elvis operator. So the Elvis operator will help us to add a replacement for the null value if it's not present. So for example, say I want to print the name. So your name is name, and within this block or within this string template, I want to say if name is null, so I'm going to have it with the Elvis operator. So the way to do this is with the question mark and the colon. If name is null, add this value, which is no name. Now if you run the program, I will have your name is no name instead of having null. So enough talking about the nullability and null values. Let's get back to getting the user input. So we have seen how to get string as user input. Let's try to get integers, double, float, or characters. Now we know that readLine and readln returns a string. Readline just nullable string and readln returns a string. So whenever we want to read some kind of other types, we can convert them. So Kotlin standard library has a lot of functions that help us with type conversion. So readline here, we want to convert it to int, so toInt, we have toInt function, and since it returns a nullable string, we have to add the save call, or let's use the readln as it returns a string. Similarly for this one here, so readln to float to double, we have double, and here readln to float, and lastly for the character we could use readln. We don't have to char here, to only char array. We could use to char array, it's fine, to char array dot first. So we're gonna get the first character, or we could use dot first directly here. So just gonna have a string, and we're gonna get the first character of this string here, which returns. So this function just returns a char here. Let's prompt the user to enter some of these values. So and now let's run the program. Stop and run. So first we're gonna enter an integer, so 1, 2, 3, 4, enter a double, 0.1, enter a float, 0.3, enter a char. So you can here you can enter a string and it will just get the first character. So I'm gonna enter answer here and see what will happen. Yeah, we got a integer, double, float, and for the char we got the first character here. Now let's head to the last way of taking the user input with the readln or null. So readln just reads the user input or returns null. So for example, user equal to readln or null, and it returns a nullable string. So you might be confused with what way to use. Well, you should know that readln and readlnOrNull are derivatives of this function here. So this is the father of these two functions here. And the creators of Kotlin, aka JetBrains, wanted to make it easier for anybody who's starting to learn Kotlin. So instead of using the readln, you could use readline or readln here, or readlnOrNull. So to make it simple, I'm just going to leave some notes here so you know which one to use, when to use which. So whenever you are expecting a string that might be null, the same thing for the readline or readlnOrNull. And here, whenever you are expecting a string that is not null. So that's it for today's video. I know it has been a long video, but we have learned a good amount of stuff with Kotlin. So until next time, stay tuned and thanks for watching.